In this chapter, we're going to talk about the founding fathers, specifically the Hamilton versus Jefferson, as two of the more important founding fathers. So let's start with Alexander Hamilton. Now, again, you can listen to the musical Hamilton. That'll get you the main points of this chapter, honestly. And if you're interested in reading books, Ron Chernow wrote the book Alexander Hamilton, fantastic biography of Alexander Hamilton. So Hamilton comes from the West Indies. The famous line, a bastard orphan, son of a whore and a Scotsman, dropped in the middle of the forgotten, is he comes with an illegitimate background, and so therefore he can't get educated in the religious schools where he's at. So instead he goes to work at an importer, so he sees how trade works, he sees how business works. And then he ends up going to New York City. He studies in King's College. He serves in the war, and he's a letter writer for Washington, but he really wants to make a name for himself. And war is one way that you can really make a name for yourself. And so he does a lot of that. And he eventually becomes a delegate for the U.S. Constitutional Convention from New York. And in that Constitutional Convention, again, we talked about last time, two big plans, the New Jersey plan, the Virginia plan. Alexander Hamilton is respected. He gets up to speak, and he goes off rails. So he talks about the best form of the government is the British form of the government. He wants a monarchy established, not supporting either the Virginia or the New Jersey plan. And people are just dumbfounded. James Madison said, the great question is, what provision shall we make for the happiness of our country? He would first make a comparative examination of the two plans, prove that there were essential defects in both, and point out such changes as might render a national one efficacious. Meaning that none of these plans work. Let's go with the big plan, monarchy. That kind of scares a lot of people. And then we see this going towards the Connecticut plan or the Great Compromise. But what's interesting is it's unclear if Hamilton really believed that monarchy was the best one, because shortly after the Constitution is passed, it has to be ratified by the states. And so he joins with John Jay and James Madison to write the Federalist Papers, a defense of the Constitution. He wrote this specifically to the audience of the states and to New York State, really, because they had to ratify the Constitution. And so there's a lot of issues they have. And they say, hey, why this doesn't even protect us from speech, religion, press. We want all those things. And so that's where James Madison writes 19 amendments. 12 were approved by Congress, but only 10 were ratified by the states. That's the Bill of Rights. So now we have the Constitution, and now these 10 amendments, which in full effect are the Constitution, known as the Bill of Rights. So now we have the Constitution, we're going forward, and now it's a matter of starting to run the country. Well, Thomas Jefferson shows up. He's been in France as an emissary. He comes back. He was the primary author of the Declaration of Independence, very well known, well respected, from Virginia. And he comes into the cabinet meeting where there's a major issue. So when we think of the cabinet, what's really important here is Thomas Jefferson was Secretary of State, and he reported directly to the president. The Secretary of Treasury had to report to Congress. So anything that he had to do had to get congressional approval. And so we come to one of the big challenges the country faced, and that was this called the Report of the Public Debt that Hamilton wrote, that said the country is in major debt as a nation. And he created a plan which he called the Assumption Plan, that the national government would assume state debts. All right, and there was a lot of these debts. Well, Jefferson and Madison weren't very in favor of this because they were from Virginia. Madison was a representative from Virginia, and Jefferson was Secretary of State. Virginia had paid most of their debts. A lot of the southern states had, because they didn't incur a lot of the costs of the Revolutionary War. It was the northern states. And so Jefferson said, no, we support states' rights. This is just a way to set up a tyrant over these states. And so in a famous scene, really depicted in Hamilton, the room where it happened, is Jefferson, Madison, Hamilton meet into a room. They have dinner, and they come with the Compromise of 1790. In that, because Hamilton needed Madison's support. He needed Madison's support because that's what Congress was going to approve the plan or not. He gets Madison's support by saying that he will work with the president, and they will work to get the support to move the capital of the United States from New York City to Washington, D.C., very close to Virginia. And in so doing, they would get support from that plan, for the Assumption Plan, and they get the support. But now comes the challenge. So now the federal government is going to say, we're going to pay off all the debts we have. Many of these debts were war bonds that soldiers received, IOU notes from the government. Well, for a while, these were being paid out in continentals, and so people didn't want to get paid in continentals. And so rather than redeem these or hold on to them, many soldiers sold these bonds to speculators, people who were buying these on 15 cents on the dollar with the hope that in the future they would be redeemed. There was a risk. Maybe they wouldn't be redeemed. And so when this happened, the question is, who should the government pay? Should they pay those soldiers who fought in the war, or should they pay those who actually own the bonds? And in a very landmark decision, which really established property rights of financial assets, it was decided that those who owned the asset, those who had the bond, were the ones who would be paid. As a result, many soldiers only were paid 15 cents on the dollar, and many of these speculators were paid dollar for dollar. But that was a decision that was made that really established a lot of financial markets within the United States. That leads us to the next battle, the national bank. And this is Hamilton, as the Secretary of Treasury, wanted a national bank. He wanted this to be able to go ahead and support it. Now, there's two readings I want to give to you, and they're on Canvas, but I want you to go through those and see what are the issues that each of them have for that. And so here's the summary of them, but I want you to read through those and identify what those are on your own. But when we talk about a bank, what a bank does is it connects people who want to save money to people who want to borrow money. And so let's suppose Joe deposits $1,500 worth of gold into the bank. So now, in a sense, there's $1,500 of the economy, of money that's at the bank. Well, the bank then can take that and they can lend $500 to Mo, and they can then lend that additional $500 to Flo. And so as a result, there is now $2,500 in this economy. In fact, with only $1,500 of gold. And so a bank can create money to circulate. And with more money, more transactions can happen. And this can be very advantageous because what it does is it allows Joe to save money and allows the bank then to take a lot of depositors or a lot of deposits and then lend those out to create capital opportunities for individuals to start their businesses or to expand their businesses. And so banks are this really important financial mediary that connects people to saving to people who are trying to borrow. And why? But the national bank had a lot of issues. So they're not, as Jefferson pointed out, there was constitutional issues. The other issue is foreign ownership. Do they want foreign governments to buy bonds and stocks in these banks and to really, in a sense, own the national banks? The other is the Bank of the United States was accepting deposits and they made loans. So they were competing with state banks. But in the end, a national bank was passed and a charter was given, and it remained a national bank until 1811. And so now we have the formation of the two very important political parties. One is the Federalists. We have Alexander Hamilton, John Adams, John Jay, John Marshall, all the Johns. Those are Federalists, and they're for a very strong federal government with well-defined roles for both the federal government and the states. Then you have the Democratic Republicans, those from Virginia, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe. Quincy Adams was even up north. Then you have Clay, Burr, Clinton, and others that were Democratic Republicans that were much more in favor of states' rights. And so to put these, Hamilton and Jefferson's views really showed the difference between these political parties. Again, Hamilton and the Federalists were a strong central government, national central banking, national roads, public education. To think about, to summarize, is they thought that government should create an environment where industries can grow and survive. Jefferson's view was for a weak central government, not a non-existent one. And I think in the book I may have talked a little bit more about non-existent. That's not the quick case, but a weak central government and much more of a strong of a state government and well-defined opportunities for state governments to exchange and trade, and the federal governments to act as an empire. And a really big focus on the agrarian society. But because these are mostly from the South, that's what their industry. And so they thought that in some, industry can grow and survive when government does not get involved in markets. And so two very differing views that we see percolate and extend all